hello, a Tad Stomer is someone from a foreign country, their campus, changing what our founders communicated. For example, as collusion slash us, not even realizing to an extent with people from our country too. Our founders declassified why and how for us not to refer to anybody as a founder, plural, besides James Madison. They declassified why and how we were to know that they were plural founders. And they counter extorted everyone and forced everyone to help the American Revolution. And people don't vote on slavery. James Madison knew they were going to vote on slavery because it was a breaching method that only allowed rules with slavery even they don't want it. Specifically and against women, against black people's rights of eyes, communications. Before America's founders were born, and James Madison, the only one we know the name of, the only reason that's gotten away with, people pretending that's debatable, that James Madison is the only founder we are directed to know, understand why and how he's the only founder we know the name of. People that vote on slavery can't speak for the republic, can't speak for democracy, but as criminally foreign influenced. We are not supposed to leave out the breaching method that measured and maintained with internationally monitored conversations. Collusions here or there. Collusion slash us. There are proofs that there's a hyper-foreign here. Because someone speaking like that in your country and other countries, too, in other words, with the isms, even the most brilliant people like Judge Napolitano, he knows a lot more about James Madison than me. But this is principle. This is the most important thing. James Madison declassified with our founders. They had to counter-extort everyone at key positions. Inside more than 13 colonies with slavery entrenched. Laws against women. Sense and sensibilities. No one had free speech for a whole bunch of list of reasons that that organized breaching method set against them. To use collusion slash us that no one wanted, but there was I admit there's exceptions when you don't have any other choice. So we have not had a legitimate voicing for the names of the people the sciences were shown to use their knowledge of good and evil to get over on correlation nature. Or would have brought up correlation slash hypercorrelation. Because everyone was child abused for what I caught them doing. With people involved with the World Trade Center attack and with relative World Trade Center attack predicate acts after the World Trade Center attack to hide that. They have collusion slash S also with wire crime acts and methods, mail crime acts and methods. There are proofs that they had roles with the anthrax. There was a really itchy letter associated with people involved with next to the World Trade Center the morning of the attack on the World Trade Center towers in Manhattan, New York, the morning of 9/11, right before the attack. And the night before it, our people involved increasingly with predicate acts on my street from other areas. I never saw them on my street. But they know this is various ways recorded. They even hid with Whiting Forensics, a bunch of people involved with the same house slash S, involved with the principal child abuser and other one years before that. Now they're fishing for truths to use for lies. It's, in other words, some Mendez police have rules with identity theft, fraud, slanders, and people that attach me to fake ties to themselves and to police when I was a kid, and now as an adult too. I didn't have a word of conversation with any officer at Wethersfield Police Department, an Officer Mendez, or not someone who's reported his brother. I don't know what his name is, but he put a different name. They switched names. Oh, it's cultural. Sometimes he uses his name. They switched names also with arresting officers with officers that weren't even there at all. And then the first one wasn't even there. In other words, they put fake things, intercities, multiple police departments with the same house, and multiple courts, family members, including the family members of judges. And then further, hyper additionally, they have with the state judicial branch officers and corrections officers, collusions also with their educators, but also forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded from a whole bunch of other countries, overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and terrorists at the same time brought up. That was also, they forced my Saudi ex to collusion slash us with them. And people on Valleycrest Street named Demorrow and people tied to them. They said Scolora was their cousin too. Those are people I recorded. They hid what I recorded at Weathersfield High School when I was a kid. They've been planting evidences with people with a Fred Grisette and others from other areas have connections. A whole bunch of people who have roles with the World Trade Center attack have been planting evidence. I didn't even saw them with my neighbors. So, in other words, they're also, oh, this he's talking about his neighbors. They won't get on paper since I was a kid. And before the World Trade Center attack, former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, his co-defendants, their family members, their neighbors of their family members, their lawyer, and people conjunctive to their locations, and the family members of foreign and domestic military and courts, and further with the state judicial branch officers and corrections officers in Weathersfield, Connecticut, and the corrections officers Weathersfield, Hartford town line. And I don't know that Dave. I just sat there for a second one time real quick. They tried to make fake exception. And these are increasingly people at my colleges and universities who have roles with officers switching names, forging names, and preventing me using my evidences offensively. They're the ones making me use their names too. No, they're leaking things, not just to me. So a whole bunch of people involved too, with more child abusers, leaders of kids, years apart, first force. And it has some more people that were confessed involved. They're pretending other two. They're planting evidences with fake, with their sources to cover this up. The WTNH, which is next to the FBI in New Haven, they have collusion slash S all along Route 175. The conjunctions to it to that, like with people with homes there, or just temporary, or tied to them, or temporary, just driving by. With Ridge Road is increasingly involved with them too, all along Route 175 and from the founding locations. And they still have replaced what our founders taught us to have communicated about those locations. George Washington had to come to Webb House. Now renamed the Webb Stevens Museum. They have other told about why George Washington came there when it was named Webb House, and now when it's themed the Webb Stevens Museum. So this breaching method has types of experts A through Z used to sense for itself, measured and maintained self-value collusion slash S, pretending other than James Madison is the name of a founder that we know the name of. Oh, but Thomas Jefferson drafted the Constitution. You guys are leaving out and replacing how everyone in that room was extorted and counter-extorted. In fact, human nature tortured and enslaved, therefore physically. You guys leave that out. How the means by it. Our founders, James Madison, detailed this. How they knew they were going to come out all those crazy things against women, against black people's rights of life, against Native. It had been against Native before America's founders were born. And the only reason that James Madison's plan worked is because of nature itself. And so see president slash chief as cipher too. Because the Constitution stands abridged. I learned from an accomplished pro se litigant that Marbury versus Madison means real justice must satisfy all appearances of real justice. And nature too shows us these things. But we have been prevented offensively, free speech, and there's an identity theft, fraud, and slander method. See, these campuses are obligations by nature itself and by our founders here and there that they can't afford to have discerned. our founders communicated for us not to allow use /s of their own speech, other people's speech, leaving out why and how. To an extent, nobody had free speech, and everyone had to pretend other to an extent. Otherwise, that body was sensed and it was adapted to by the breaching method /s. Even if that body was a majority of people, even if it was any united country, they were already self-valued syntax nature through and as systems tactical ulterior from the one sick to syntactically, functionally, positive its way. Nature's the one that's generating totally different individual species bodies of a whole bunch of different individual species bodies of the same individual bodies of the same species body, simultaneously showing what generates and is independence and unity. We are shown that it is generating all group differences like male, female, because it has that in other species bodies too, and we didn't generate that, and they didn't. All exceptions come with demonstration. /s of the same thing. /s, and we could ignore its system or change it, but it demonstrates with negative value nature progressions, acts and natures, and with a special difference transfer. The whole ocean is polluted. You think that someone that could speak for science legitimately, just a posture behind the suits and ties, and motivations narratives that are leaving out the actual motivations /s that we have recorded. You guys can't even help a YouTuber who speaks about predicate acts that are against the World Trade Center attack, against all humanity. You want to change and fake what I say about those predicate acts, because everyone has roles with the predicate acts method. That's why you can't even afford millions of us wanting to have how we have black people's whites of eyes, for example, how we have means to correlate / hyper-correlate, pseudo-sophistication, pseudo-integrity, black people, peer who disbelieves. So in other words, forgiveness is to not leave out the breaching method or get it wrong. Vaccines, a song, but makes a shush to hear. Vaccine, but it sings a song but makes no sound, but prefers the shush sound. Wrestling does not prefer the shush sound. In martial arts, semi-prefer the shush sound. Boxing prefers the shush sound completely. And we are shown it is the same identity the sciences share. That one that generates all group differences or generates demonstration /s that we are or have been using an abridged system from its own, any abridged systems. And it shows us the moment we will be. See, but no one could, everyone knows that in other words, we need better than plastic bottles of water and like lead pipes. Oh, but that's in Michigan, that's another state. How could you guys speak about states' rights? You guys pretended that. Look at the descriptions of how America unfolded, replacing what our founders communicated. They communicated that what they said is distinct from what they communicated because there was a breaching method, measuring everybody through everyone's roles without hurting themselves and others. Syntactically, therefore physically. They're going to speak about economics. They're going to speak about debt. They want to speak about slavery, framing us with the people from abroad in collusions with our campuses A through Z because they were child abused. Because here and there they have the sick isms used too because they have to replace what science shows is proper for words. There's all kinds of, it's only concentrated corruption with psychiatry and conjunctions to it like counselors and things like that. These databases, a hyper-additional collusion /s with the breaching methods use of them, the breaching method /s. Since before computers, this breaching method used the algorithm measuring and maintaining names A through Z. Self-value use /S of names and difference /A through Z. /S, difference / differences. Because it is that different. There is a different, distinct identity of simultaneous nature that is not our species body. It is not the other species bodies. But while it is all things anyway. That's why it is and how it is showing us these things. Even like two eyes, two sexes. We are shown that the rest of its complete natures, is manifest as parts, inseparable from any individual part of itself. It is in one way, in other words. In other words, James Madison, he communicated that his words and the words of our founders directed us to understand why and how. James Madison is the only founder that we know the name of. They replaced that. One can't be pretending that the Constitution's unabridged if they're voting on slavery, even if they're pretending that they're using the truth for a lie. You know how many people were using the truth for a lie? That the North was against slavery. While they had both the North and the South had internationally monitored conversations over criminal enterprises, private ones, international companies that didn't like themselves. In other words, terrorists, all that was manifest. All the people, all at the same time, preventing anyone the quality of fact-achieving nature necessary to speak for the Constitution unabridged, let alone for nature at the same time. And hyper additionally, why and how we have rights that are too numerous to have to list them. Per Judge Napolitano, knows a lot about James Madison, but this is principle. And more important, and this will accelerate. See, but the genius of our experts, A through Z, they came through criminally foreign influence / hyper-criminally foreign influence campuses and exceptions. Please follow mandated law. Get me off the fake conversations with WFSP, a CBS affiliate, and their sources, including the interbranch forging and switching names, and time collusion /S with names on all sides of cases, news, and themselves at the same time putting sequence shifts, fake transcripts, fake ties to all ages. They're putting fake ties to kids and fake ties to doctors and foreign and domestic with the news, while they were forcing a principal child abuser in World Trade Center predicate acts and collusions with untimely deaths years apart that brought up the campus to me, with people involved with murders and confessions about that. Intercities, intrust cities too. And increasingly too, people tied to a Joshua Stryker with foreign and domestic intelligence, overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and shipping locations, and federal criminals involved with corners of streets, with the FBI, with the CIA. In other words, CIA too has syntax on Facebook, collusions with them with upskirt nature pictures. Then further, before the principal child abuser upskirt picture guy was caught for that, I caught him with way worse, forced principal of a retired police chief Cintron, and a whole bunch of people tied to him and his daughter. I never met her and I was around her in my life. And their intimate tie of a police chief. He was their police chief for years. And there was one before him too, with the same house, involved with a cousin named Phil Collusions, further involved with writing forensics confessions, and people refusing to show me a police report. And they keep putting more confessions and more names of more officers and people tied to this Phil Collusions, who's one of the cousins of the people at 80 Carriage Hill Drive, involved with the police that are refusing to identify themselves intercities and intra-cities and intra campuses with all kinds of predicate acts and methods of them. And then further, with all sides of cases, and then further, hyper additionally, these people and people tied to them with the corrections officers and judicial branch officers involved too, with their other cousins next to my hotel, right next to the World Trade Center towers the night before the World Trade Center attack. And then and with names inside the Ninth Circuit Court next to the World Trade Center towers, there was a proven afterwards, right before the attack that morning, presented to the panel of judges were legal papers where they switched the date that they were timely stamped and brought to the court. They changed the date to make it look as if they'd been filed late to the panel of judges from inside the court insidiously. And names on both sides of that case and their sources were brought up in confessions by the police intercities on off Central Connecticut State University and people involved with the family of and as a Dean Judd, who I never met. I never had a word of conversation with his son. They have roles with foreign and domestic military, planting evidences, sequence shifts, fake motivations, communicating things they can't go back and afford to be honest about, everything that's involved with that. And as people also involved with the same house intercities, with that same spot. And it's also associated with like a serial killer's body dumping spot in that serial killer. And his roles with people at that prison, a Sandy Hook prison, are also people with that body dumping spot in the Britain. And that's in Newtown, Connecticut. And these are also people tied to Adam Lanza. We organize crimes with the kids, identity theft, fraud, slanders. And I'm not, that's not right what he did. But they do things to really, really, really make people mad. And make them ignore things, and the breaching method shows overt criminal enterprise, private ones, terrorists, and the three branches of government intelligence. They need to hide the same sequence shifts. They need to hide the same delusions too, and uses of difference /s that they can't afford to have discerned, where it's relative. Because nature uses its difference. How it is a different identity of simultaneous nature. It is a different identity of invisible but still discernible, as the parts of speech of English grammar are, and of the other languages. They also come with the / hyper-invisible but still discernible. And for example, this is the body of that same identity of value progression generating totally different species bodies of individual bodies, 2 eyes, all hungry, all thirsty, and totally, birds even, and male, female. 2 distinct identities of hyper invisible but still discernible. There's 3 of them, and they're only increasing value equally. And that's what generated and what generates the difference of and the value of male and female. It is for correlation / hypercorrelation. Again, where it is for the discernment of that body generating all things that we could discern to an extent /s. And this is called correlation / hypercorrelation. It is the body of what we are discerning why and how there are only 2 a present participle and a past participle. And know how the future, like the value of seasons that are not even here yet. And even if they never get here, we are shown how we can discern that they are only increasing value because of how all things are its identity of volume. And its relativity to a special difference here, or it forces a special difference from here, as Earth, but through ourselves. It is not the rest of Earth that has the whole ocean polluted, while we're still in the suburbs that were only allowed to unfold. The way the torture, extortion, factory nature, therefore physical slavery method, torture, extortion method against black, white, north and south was entrenched. Against women, north and south entrenched. whole bunch of different things at multi-front that no one wanted collusions with, except for how no one wanted to be sensed, breaking the rules. And because they would ask questions to measure and maintain everyone collusion / doesn't get themselves and everyone. James Madison explained how they knew that we would come out of this, and then they would sense us when we have to speak. So they forced everyone to speak. And when we were burning money, we're playing the economic game. You don't play an economic game. They're torturing, extorting, and enslaving us. And they got us frames for it still through our campuses, because they have much worse. There are many, many names at Harvard Hospital involved with the Leahy family and the Lombardo family, and foreign and domestic, and judges, and with their family members involved with sexual medical offenders of kids speaking fake things in records, and their delusions wrought too. Collusions replacing what our founders taught. See that the names of the people of the sciences individually grouped and together, they do that too. Now they can't afford to have discern that most principle, why and how our founders communicated. In other words, you're not supposed to pretend they're the founder. You can't discern there's a breaching method there. And our founders, we're supposed to only refer to our founders plural as James Madison. And we're also told that there was enough of the founders that they were able to counter extort people at key locations and make everyone break the laws that if you do that, there's no way to live. But they gave them no choice anyway. And I didn't have that trust their plan. And only one of them we know the name of is James Madison. See, but they get away with pretending things like this are debatable. And their style's nature of logic that then have to use. That's the most principal thing about James Madison. You don't have that right, you have nothing else right. And if you have that right, you could have just that in nature itself. Black people. Here, we are to force the Constitution unabridged. The means appear better than free. We have means. We have to make fresh water without PFAS, forever chemicals, all that in it. So this is not by accident. This is measured and maintained, shock and awe at A through Z. And all humanity voicings, assist through and as systems, nature's tactical interior. From the one generating the individual species bodies, individual bodies, and all group differences distinctly, non-distinct. Because this shows us it's functional, how its body is functional, being hyper-invisible but still discernible. It's the one that shows us is the smallest finite detail being left out, having been, like criminally foreign influence databases. The roles of the torture and extortion and slavery with the syntax. You don't pretend that anyone had free speech. Oh, but they were writing about free speech. They were forced to. Black pupils. See the whites of eyes. Is a famous saying. I have to figure out which colonel. There's a colonel who said it, but everyone was counter-sorted by James Madison's plan. You guys can't even have debates about things legitimately. And the nature of debate. There's another thing. We're gonna discern the hyper-invisible but still discernible besides what you think what I'm speaking about when I say the nature of the debate.